sleep study.
The ice never forgets. Deep beneath Antarctica's frozen surface lies a continent that has been collecting secrets for millions of years, preserving them in perfect, terrifying detail. What we found down there in recent decades has fundamentally changed how we see our planet, our history, and perhaps most disturbing of all, our future. I'm talking about discoveries so unsettling that some researchers have gone on record saying they wish they'd never made them. Blood-red waterfalls that shouldn't exist. Ancient viruses locked in ice that could reshape life as we know it. Structures beneath the ice that defy explanation. And sounds recorded deep in the Antarctic ice that have left scientists genuinely disturbed. Over the next 2 hours, we're going to explore the most haunting discoveries ever made in Antarctica. These aren't just scientific curiosities or interesting facts to share at dinner parties. These are findings that have kept researchers awake at night. Discoveries that have forced us to rewrite textbooks, and revelations that suggest our planet is far stranger and more dangerous than we ever imagined. But before we dive into the abyss, you need to understand something about Antarctica itself. This isn't just a big chunk of ice at the bottom of the world. It's a continent that's been isolated for over 25 million years, developing in complete darkness beneath miles of ice. It's a place where the normal rules don't apply, where life finds ways to survive in conditions that would kill everything else on Earth within minutes. The continent holds 90% of the world's fresh water, locked away in ice sheets that are up to 3 miles thick. If all that ice melted, sea levels would rise by over 200 feet. But that's not the scary part. The scary part is what's been growing, evolving, and waiting beneath all that ice while the rest of the world moved on. Scientists estimate that we've explored less than 1% of what lies beneath Antarctica's ice. Think about that for a moment. We know more about the surface of Mars than we do about what's directly beneath the ice on our own planet. And in that tiny fraction we have explored, we've found things that challenge everything we thought we knew about life, death, and the very nature of our world. Let me start with something that should be impossible. In 1911, geologist Griffith Taylor discovered what appeared to be a waterfall flowing from the Taylor Glacier. But this wasn't ordinary water. This was blood. Bright red, iron-rich liquid pouring out of solid ice like an open wound in the earth itself. For over a century, bloodfalls has been one of Antarctica's most photographed mysteries. But it wasn't until 2017 that researchers finally understood what they were looking at, and the truth is far more disturbing than anyone imagined. Deep beneath the Taylor Glacier, trapped for over 1.5 million years, is a lake. But this isn't just any lake. This is a body of water that has been completely cut off from the outside world since before humans existed. No sunlight, no oxygen, no connection to any other ecosystem on Earth. And yet, it's teeming with life. The water is 3 times saltier than the ocean and contains no oxygen at all. The temperature never rises above -10 degrees Fahrenheit. By every rule of biology we know, nothing should be able to survive in these conditions, but something does. Multiple somethings, actually. Scientists have identified at least 17 different types of microorganisms living in this ancient lake. But here's where it gets truly unsettling. These organisms have been evolving in complete isolation for over 1 million years. They've developed ways to survive that are completely alien to life as we know it. They don't use oxygen to survive. Instead, they've learned to breathe iron and sulfur. They've created their own closed-loop ecosystem, recycling the same materials over and over again for millions of years. They are, in essence, living proof that life can exist in conditions we thought were impossible. But the discovery of blood falls raised a question that keeps researchers awake at night. If life this alien can survive beneath Antarctica's ice, what else is down there? What other forms of life have been evolving in isolation beneath miles of frozen water? The answer came in 2013, when a team of Russian scientists made a discovery that sent shockwaves through the scientific community. Deep beneath Antarctica's ice, at a place called Lake Vostok, they found something that shouldn't exist. Lake Vostok is buried beneath 2.5 miles of ice. It's been sealed away from the outside world for at least 15 million years. It's larger than Lake Ontario and deeper than the Empire State Building is tall. For decades, scientists theorized that if anything lived in Lake Vostok, it would be simple, primitive organisms, barely clinging to life. They were wrong. Catastrophically wrong. When the Russian team finally broke through the ice and extracted samples from the lake, they found an ecosystem unlike anything on Earth. The water contained thousands of different species of bacteria, many of which were completely unknown to science. But that wasn't the disturbing part. The disturbing part was what these organisms were doing. They had been feeding on each other in an endless cycle for millions of years, creating an ecosystem so closed and so perfectly balanced that it had essentially become immortal. Nothing died and stayed dead. Everything was recycled, repurposed, and reused in an endless loop of consumption and regeneration. But even more unsettling was what the organisms had become after millions of years of isolation. Some had developed the ability to survive in pure acid. Others could withstand radiation levels that would kill a human instantly. Many had developed defense mechanisms that were unlike anything scientists had ever seen. One species, which researchers have been reluctant to name publicly, produces a toxin so potent that a single drop could kill every living thing in a small lake. Another had developed a form of reproduction that allows it to create perfect copies of itself almost instantly, meaning it could theoretically overrun any ecosystem it encountered within days. The implications were terrifying. These weren't just ancient microorganisms. These were organisms that had spent millions of years becoming the perfect survivors. They had evolved in an environment with no predators, no competition from outside species, and unlimited time to perfect their survival strategies. And now, for the first time in 15 million years, they were exposed to the outside world. The scientific team that made the discovery immediately implemented unprecedented containment protocols. All samples were kept in isolation. All equipment was sterilized, using methods typically reserved for space missions. Team members underwent medical monitoring for months after the expedition, but the damage may have already been done. In 2014, researchers detected traces of unknown microorganisms in ice samples collected from areas hundreds of miles away from Lake Vostok. The organisms matched genetic markers found in the lake, suggesting they had somehow traveled through the ice sheet. This discovery led to one of the most classified research projects in recent history. Government agencies from multiple countries began funding expeditions to map and catalogue what lies beneath Antarctica's ice. The official reason given was climate research and environmental monitoring. The real reason was far more urgent. Scientists had realized that climate change wasn't just melting Antarctica's ice, it was potentially unleashing millions of years of evolution that the world wasn't prepared to handle. But ancient microorganisms weren't the only things hiding beneath the ice. In 2016, a team of researchers using ground-penetrating radar made a discovery that forced them to completely rethink what they thought they knew about Antarctica's history. Deep beneath the ice, they found structures, not natural formations. Structures. The images showed what appeared to be geometric patterns stretching for miles beneath the ice. Straight lines, perfect circles, right angles, formations that looked almost architectural in their precision. The initial assumption was that these were natural formations, perhaps created by unique geological processes in Antarctica's isolated environment. But as more detailed scans were conducted, that explanation became harder and harder to maintain. The structures appeared to be made of materials that weren't naturally occurring in Antarctica. They showed signs of organization and planning that suggested intelligence. And most disturbing of all, some of them appeared to be moving, not quickly, but over the course of months, researchers noticed that certain formations were shifting position. Some were growing, others seemed to be connecting to form larger, more complex structures. The discovery was so significant that it triggered the largest scientific expedition to Antarctica in over 50 years. Teams from 12 different countries converged on the continent, bringing with them the most advanced drilling and imaging equipment ever deployed. What they found beneath the ice changed everything. The structures weren't just random formations. They were part of a vast network stretching across hundreds of miles beneath the Antarctic ice sheet. Some appeared to be incredibly ancient, possibly millions of years old. Others showed signs of recent activity. But the most disturbing discovery came when researchers managed to drill down to one of the smaller structures. The samples they brought back contained materials that shouldn't exist in nature, compounds that required specific conditions and processes to create. Materials that suggested not just intelligence, but advanced intelligence. The official reports from these expeditions remain highly classified, but leaked documents suggest that what researchers found beneath Antarctica's ice was evidence of a civilization that predated human history by millions of years. A civilization that might not be entirely extinct. In 2018, research stations across Antarctica began detecting unusual seismic activity. Not earthquakes exactly, but rhythmic vibrations coming from deep beneath the ice. The patterns were too regular to be natural, too complex to be random. When researchers analyzed the recordings, they found something that defied explanation. The vibrations formed patterns, sequences, what some described as a kind of communication. The signals were coming from the same areas where the mysterious structures had been detected, and they were growing stronger. Teams stationed at remote research facilities began reporting strange phenomena. Equipment malfunctioning in ways that suggested outside interference, ice formations changing overnight, and sounds coming from deep beneath their stations that couldn't be explained by any known natural processes. One researcher, whose name has been withheld for security reasons, described hearing what sounded like machinery operating deep beneath the ice. Not the random creaking and shifting of natural ice movement, but the steady, rhythmic operation of something complex and purposeful. Another team reported finding areas where the ice had been melted from below, creating caverns that showed signs of recent excavation. The walls of these caverns were smooth, almost polished, and showed geometric patterns that suggested they had been created deliberately. But perhaps the most unsettling discovery came from a team studying ice cores in a remote part of East Antarctica. In samples dating back over 400,000 years, they found something that shouldn't have been there. Traces of technology. Not the crude tools of early human civilization, but complex materials that suggested advanced manufacturing processes. Alloys that required sophisticated metallurgy. Polymers that indicated knowledge of advanced chemistry. And most disturbing of all, traces of radioactive materials that suggested nuclear technology. The implications were staggering. Either human civilization was far older and more advanced than we believed, or something else had been developing technology on Earth long before humans arrived. But the evidence suggested a third, more unsettling possibility. These materials weren't ancient. They were recent, very recent. Something beneath Antarctica's ice was actively creating advanced technology, and it had been doing so for hundreds of thousands of years. The discovery triggered a complete re-evaluation of Antarctica's role in Earth's history. Scientists began to realize that the continent wasn't just a frozen wasteland at the bottom of the world. It was an archive, a repository of Earth's hidden history, preserving evidence of civilizations and life forms that the rest of the world had forgotten. But it was also something else. Something that no one wanted to acknowledge publicly. It was active. The structures beneath the ice weren't just ancient ruins. They were functioning installations. The organisms in the buried lakes weren't just surviving, they were thriving, growing, and potentially preparing to expand beyond their icy prison. And the signals coming from deep beneath the ice weren't random noise. They were communications. Messages being sent between different parts of a vast network that stretched across the entire continent. Something was awake beneath Antarctica's ice. Something that had been waiting for millions of years. And climate change wasn't just melting the ice that covered it. Climate change was setting it free. The first sign that something was fundamentally wrong came in 2019, when satellite imagery revealed something that shouldn't have been possible. Massive sections of Antarctica's ice sheet were melting from below, creating caverns and tunnels that stretched for hundreds of miles beneath the surface. But this wasn't ordinary melting caused by climate change. The patterns were too organized, too systematic. The melted areas formed geometric shapes when viewed from above. Hexagons, spirals, and interconnected networks that looked almost like circuit boards etched into the ice. Ground-penetrating radar revealed the true scope of what was happening. The melting wasn't random. It was following the same patterns as the mysterious structures researchers had discovered years earlier. Something was actively heating specific areas of the ice from below, creating a vast underground network of tunnels and chambers. When teams finally managed to access some of these newly created caverns, they found environments unlike anything on Earth. The air was warm, almost tropical, despite being surrounded by miles of ice. Strange fungi covered the walls, glowing with an eerie bioluminescence that provided the only light in the darkness. But the most disturbing discovery was the sound. Every cavern they explored was filled with a low, constant humming. Not the sound of machinery, but something organic, something alive. The humming seemed to respond to the presence of the research teams, growing louder when they approached certain areas, falling silent when they retreated. One researcher described it as the sound of breathing. Massive, slow breathing, coming from something unimaginably large, hidden deeper in the cavern system. Analysis of the air in these caverns revealed atmospheric conditions that hadn't existed on Earth's surface for millions of years. High levels of methane, unusual concentrations of rare gases, and trace amounts of compounds that suggested biological processes operating on a scale that defied comprehension. The walls of the caverns showed scratch marks, deep gouges in the ice that suggested something large had been moving through these spaces. Something with claws or appendages capable of carving through solid ice as easily as carving through soft earth. Teams began finding organic material embedded in the cavern walls. Not fossilized remains, but fresh biological matter. Tissue samples that appeared to be recently shed. DNA analysis revealed genetic sequences unlike anything in any database. These weren't related to any known species on Earth. They weren't even related to any known form of life. The genetic material showed signs of deliberate modification, sequences that appeared to be artificially enhanced or altered. DNA that had been engineered to survive in conditions that would kill ordinary life forms instantly. But the most unsettling aspect of these discoveries was the timeline. Carbon dating of the organic material revealed that it was recent. Very recent. Some samples were less than a year old. Something was actively shedding biological material in these caverns. Something was living, growing and moving through the tunnels beneath Antarctica's ice. Research teams began reporting equipment failures that couldn't be explained by environmental factors. Cameras would malfunction, showing static or impossible images before shutting down completely. Communication equipment would pick up signals that weren't being broadcast by any human source. GPS devices would give readings that placed teams in locations that didn't exist on any map. One team reported their motion sensors detecting movement in caverns they knew were empty. large objects moving through the tunnels at speeds that suggested intelligence and purpose. But when they investigated, they found nothing except the scratch marks in the walls and the constant, unnerving sound of breathing from somewhere deeper in the darkness. In late 2019, a research station in Queen Maud Land lost contact with the outside world for 6 days. When communication was finally restored, the team reported that something had been circling their station during the blackout period, not flying overhead, but moving beneath the ice, creating vibrations so powerful that equipment inside the station was shaken from tables. The team described hearing sounds from below that seemed almost like attempts at communication, rhythmic patterns that varied in pitch and intensity as if something was trying to establish contact. When they attempted to respond by tapping on the floor of their station, the sounds from below changed, becoming more complex and seemingly more urgent. On the 6th day, the sounds stopped abruptly. All seismic activity in the area ceased. And then, according to the official report, something began to emerge from the ice near their station. The details of what the team observed during those final hours remain classified, but leaked communications suggest they witnessed something that challenged everything science thought it knew about life on Earth. Whatever they saw left the entire research team requiring extensive psychological counseling upon their return. 2 members of the team resigned from their positions immediately and refused to discuss their experiences. A 3rd team member disappeared entirely before debriefing could be completed. The incident at Queen Maud Land triggered a complete restructuring of Antarctic research protocols. Teams were no longer allowed to operate in isolation. All expeditions were required to maintain constant communication with multiple monitoring stations. And most significantly, certain areas of Antarctica were declared off-limits to all research activity. These restricted zones weren't marked on public maps, but satellite imagery revealed their locations. Perfect circles of territory, each roughly 50 miles in diameter, scattered across the continent. Areas where no aircraft were allowed to fly, no teams were permitted to establish camps, and no drilling or excavation was authorized under any circumstances. The official explanation was environmental protection. The reality was containment. By 2020, monitoring stations across Antarctica were detecting seismic activity unlike anything in recorded history. Not earthquakes, but sustained vibrations that seemed to originate from a single source deep beneath the ice sheet. The vibrations were rhythmic, organized, and growing stronger every month. Analysis of the seismic data revealed patterns that suggested massive construction activity beneath the ice. Something was building, something was expanding, and it was doing so at an accelerating pace. Ground-penetrating radar showed the underground network of caverns and tunnels growing larger every week. New passages appeared overnight. Existing chambers expanded to enormous sizes. And at the center of it all, deep beneath miles of ice, something massive was taking shape. The structure was unlike anything ever detected on Earth. It was perfectly symmetrical, incredibly complex, and appeared to be constructed from materials that didn't register properly on any scanning equipment. It was as if the structure existed in a way that human technology couldn't fully perceive or understand. But the most disturbing aspect of the structure was its size. Based on seismic readings, it was enormous, larger than any city on Earth, larger than some countries, a construction project of such vast scale that it defied comprehension. And it was growing. Teams monitoring the seismic data began noticing correlations between the underground activity and changes in global weather patterns. Every major expansion of the underground structure coincided with unusual atmospheric disturbances around the world. Sudden temperature changes, unexpected storm systems, and atmospheric anomalies that meteorologists couldn't explain. The implications were terrifying. Whatever was happening beneath Antarctica's ice wasn't just a local phenomenon, it was having global effects. The underground structure was somehow influencing Earth's climate, weather systems, and possibly even its magnetic field. But the connections went deeper than anyone wanted to acknowledge. Researchers began finding similar seismic signatures in other remote locations around the world. Deep ocean trenches, isolated mountain ranges, and underground cave systems were all showing signs of coordinated activity. Whatever was beneath Antarctica wasn't alone. It was part of a global network, a system that had been operating beneath human awareness for possibly millions of years. And now, for reasons no one understood, it was becoming active. The discovery of this global network triggered the most classified research project in human history. Intelligence agencies from every major power began working together, sharing resources and information in ways that had never happened before. The threat was too large, too incomprehensible for any single nation to address alone. Teams of researchers, military personnel, and intelligence operatives were deployed to monitoring stations around the world. Their mission was simple: observe, document, and under no circumstances, make direct contact with whatever they discovered. But by late 2020, the policy of non-interference was becoming impossible to maintain. The underground network was no longer content to remain hidden. It was beginning to make itself known. Research stations around the world began reporting direct encounters, not just seismic activity or unusual readings on instruments, but physical manifestations of whatever was operating beneath the Earth's surface. Teams would arrive at their stations to find equipment that had been moved overnight, not damaged or destroyed, but carefully rearranged in patterns that suggested intelligence and purpose. Communication devices would be modified in ways that enhanced their capabilities, allowing them to pick up signals from sources that shouldn't exist. Most disturbing of all, teams began finding messages, not written in any human language, but carved into ice, stone, and metal surfaces using symbols that appeared to represent mathematical concepts and scientific principles. The messages seemed to be attempts at communication, efforts to establish dialogue with the human researchers. But the content of these messages was deeply unsettling. They contained information about Earth's history that contradicted everything science thought it knew. Details about mass extinction events that had never been discovered. Descriptions of civilizations that had existed millions of years before human evolution began. And warnings, urgent, desperate warnings about changes coming to Earth that would make previous extinction events look insignificant by comparison. The messages suggested that whatever was beneath the ice had been monitoring human civilization for thousands of years. It had watched empires rise and fall, had observed the development of technology and science, and had been waiting for humanity to reach a specific level of advancement before making contact. But according to the messages, humanity had reached that level far too quickly. The rapid pace of technological development, combined with environmental destruction and climate change, had triggered something that the underground civilization had been desperately trying to prevent. The messages spoke of a planetary defense system, a network of installations hidden beneath the Earth's surface, designed to protect the planet from threats that came from beyond the solar system. For millions of years, this system had operated automatically, responding to dangers that humanity had never known existed. But the system was failing. The installations were old, damaged by geological changes and environmental shifts. And now, with Earth's climate changing rapidly and human activity disrupting natural systems, the planetary defense network was breaking down. The underground civilization was trying to repair the system before it failed completely. But they needed help. They needed resources, technology, and most importantly, they needed humanity to stop the activities that were causing the system to malfunction. The implications were staggering. If the messages were true, then human civilization wasn't just facing climate change or environmental destruction. We were facing the complete breakdown of planetary systems that had protected Earth for millions of years. And the things that those systems had been protecting us from were already beginning to arrive. The first confirmation, that something was actively approaching Earth came from an unlikely source. In January 2021, the Hubble Space Telescope detected an object in the outer reaches of our solar system that defied every known law of physics and astronomy. The object was massive, roughly the size of a small moon, but it wasn't following any predictable orbital path. Instead, it was moving in a straight line toward Earth, decelerating in ways that suggested controlled propulsion. Its surface reflected no light, making it nearly invisible against the darkness of space. But the most disturbing aspect of the object was its behavior. As it moved through the solar system, it seemed to be scanning planets and moons, sending out energy pulses that penetrated deep beneath their surfaces. When these pulses reached Earth, monitoring stations in Antarctica detected immediate responses from the underground network. The seismic activity beneath the ice increased dramatically. The mysterious structures began operating at levels that created vibrations powerful enough to be felt on the surface. And for the first time in recorded history, the installations began transmitting signals into space. The signals weren't random. They were complex, mathematically precise communications being sent directly towards the approaching object. Analysis of the transmissions revealed they contained detailed information about Earth's current state, including atmospheric composition, geological stability, and most significantly, the status of the planetary defense network. The object responded. Its trajectory shifted slightly, and it began transmitting its own signals back toward Earth. These communications bypassed all human technology and went directly to the underground installations. Whatever conversation was taking place between the approaching object and the civilization beneath Antarctica was happening on frequencies and using methods that human science couldn't intercept or understand. But the effects of these communications were immediate and terrifying. The underground network began expanding at an unprecedented rate. New installations came online in locations around the world that had never shown any previous activity. Ancient structures buried beneath ocean floors began transmitting signals. Mountain ranges that had been geologically stable for millions of years started showing signs of internal construction activity. Research teams monitoring these developments realized they were witnessing something unprecedented in human history. The planet itself was preparing for something. Every hidden installation, every buried structure, every component of the underground network was being activated and brought to full operational status. The timeline for these preparations suggested urgency. Whatever was approaching Earth wasn't just another visitor to our solar system. It was something the planetary defense network had been designed specifically to handle. And based on the frantic level of activity beneath the surface, it was something that posed an existential threat to all life on the planet. By mid-2021, the effects of the underground network's activation were becoming impossible to hide from the general public. Unusual seismic activity was being reported in locations around the world that had never experienced earthquakes. Ocean temperatures were fluctuating in patterns that couldn't be explained by climate models. And atmospheric anomalies were creating weather patterns so unusual that meteorologists were running out of ways to explain them to the public. But the most visible changes were happening in Antarctica itself. Massive sections of the ice sheet were melting at rates that exceeded every worst-case climate projection. But this wasn't ordinary melting caused by atmospheric warming. The ice was being heated from below by the increased activity of the underground installations. Satellite imagery revealed the true scope of what was happening. Enormous caverns were opening in the ice, creating gaps that stretched for hundreds of miles. These weren't random formations caused by natural processes. They were carefully planned openings, designed to provide access to installations that had been buried beneath the ice for millions of years. Teams monitoring these developments began detecting massive objects moving through the newly created caverns. Not geological formations or natural phenomena, but constructed devices of enormous size and complexity. Machinery that had been dormant for millennia was coming online, preparing for operations that no human could fully comprehend. The scale of the technology being revealed defied every assumption about what was possible on Earth. Individual components of the underground network were larger than entire cities. The energy requirements for their operation exceeded the total power output of human civilization. And the materials, they were constructed from displayed properties that violated fundamental laws of physics. But perhaps most unsettling was the realization that this technology wasn't alien in the way most people understood the term. Analysis of the construction techniques and design principles revealed approaches that were fundamentally Earth-based. This wasn't technology from another world. This was technology that had been developed here, on our planet, by intelligences that had called Earth home long before human civilization began. The implications forced a complete re-evaluation of Earth's history. The planet hadn't been a quiet, slowly evolving world until humans arrived. It had been home to advanced civilizations for millions of years. Civilizations that had developed technology capable of planetary-scale engineering. Civilizations that had faced threats from beyond Earth and had built defenses to protect their world. And now, those same defenses were being activated to protect us from something that was approaching from the depths of space. The first direct visual confirmation of what the Planetary Defense Network was preparing to face came from the James Webb Space Telescope in August 2021. The images it captured showed the approaching object in unprecedented detail, and what astronomers saw challenged every assumption about life in the universe. The object wasn't a natural formation or even a constructed spacecraft in any conventional sense. It was something that appeared to be alive. Its surface pulsed with organic rhythms. Structures on its exterior grew and changed configuration as it moved through space. And most disturbing of all, it seemed to be aware that it was being observed. When the Webb telescope focused on specific areas of the object, those areas would change, almost as if responding to the attention. Sections of the surface would shift and reconfigure, revealing internal structures that defied comprehension. The object wasn't just traveling through space, it was actively adapting to the conditions it encountered, evolving as it approached its destination. Analysis of the object's composition revealed materials that shouldn't exist in nature, biological components that could survive in the vacuum of space, metallic structures that displayed organic properties, and most unnervingly, signatures that suggested the entire object was a single, massive living entity. The scale was incomprehensible. The object was hundreds of miles across, with a mass that exceeded many asteroids. If it truly was alive, it represented a form of life so advanced and alien that human science had no framework for understanding it. But the object wasn't alone. As telescopes continued monitoring its approach, they detected smaller objects moving alongside it. Not satellites or escort craft, but what appeared to be offspring or extensions of the main entity. Dozens of these smaller objects surrounded the primary mass, moving in coordinated patterns that suggested a collective intelligence. The implications were staggering. Earth wasn't facing a single threat from space. It was facing an entire ecosystem of alien life forms, each one potentially capable of devastating the planet. And according to the frantic activity of the underground defense network, this wasn't the first time such entities had approached Earth. Analysis of ancient ice cores from Antarctica revealed evidence of similar encounters throughout Earth's history. Every major extinction event in the planet's past corresponded with unusual atmospheric disturbances and geological activity that matched the patterns being detected now. The underground civilization hadn't just built a defense network. They had been using it repeatedly throughout Earth's history to protect the planet from recurring threats. The dinosaur extinction, the Permian-Triassic extinction, and dozens of smaller mass die-offs all showed signs of having been caused not by natural disasters, but by encounters with entities similar to what was now approaching Earth. The Planetary Defense Network had successfully repelled these threats for millions of years, protecting Earth's evolving life forms from destruction. But each encounter had taken its toll. The defense installations were ancient, damaged by countless battles and eroded by geological changes. The civilization that had built them had retreated deeper and deeper underground, conserving their resources for the threats they knew would eventually return. And now, with Earth's climate changing rapidly and human activity disrupting natural systems, the defense network was operating at reduced capacity just when it was needed most. The underground civilization's attempts to repair and upgrade their installations were hampered by the very environmental changes they were trying to protect against. Rising temperatures were destabilizing ice-based components. Ocean acidification was corroding underwater installations, and electromagnetic interference from human technology was disrupting communication between network nodes. Research teams monitoring the situation began to understand why the underground messages had become increasingly urgent. The approaching threat was arriving at the worst possible time, when Earth's defenses were at their weakest point in millions of years. By late 2021, the approaching entities had entered the outer regions of the solar system. Their presence was affecting space-based satellites and creating electromagnetic disturbances that disrupted global communications. But these effects were minor compared to what was happening beneath Earth's surface. The underground network was operating at full capacity, drawing enormous amounts of energy from sources that human science couldn't identify. The heat generated by this activity was creating massive changes in global climate patterns. Ice sheets were collapsing, not just in Antarctica, but in Greenland and other polar regions. Ocean currents were shifting in ways that disrupted weather systems around the world, but the most dramatic changes were happening in the deep ocean. Monitoring stations detected massive structures rising from ocean trenches around the world. Ancient installations that had been dormant on the sea floor for millions of years were surfacing, revealing technology that dwarfed anything human civilization had ever conceived. These oceanic installations were clearly part of the same network as the Antarctic structures, but they served different functions. Where the Antarctic installations seemed focused on communication and coordination, the oceanic structures appeared to be weapons systems. Massive arrays of unknown technology pointed towards space, preparing to engage targets that were still months away from Earth. The scale of the oceanic installations defied comprehension. Individual weapons systems were the size of skyscrapers, emerging from the depths with mechanical precision that spoke of millions of years of engineering refinement. The energy signatures they generated were so intense that they created localized distortions in Earth's magnetic field. Commercial shipping around the world reported encounters with these installations as they rose from the ocean depths. Massive structures breaking the surface without warning, creating waves that capsized smaller vessels and electromagnetic pulses that disabled electronic equipment for hundreds of miles in all directions. Governments around the world struggled to explain these phenomena to their populations. Official statements spoke of unusual geological activity and unexplained weather patterns. The truth was far too disturbing to reveal publicly. Humanity was witnessing the activation of planetary defense systems that predated our species by millions of years, preparing to fight a battle for Earth's survival against entities that existed beyond our understanding. But the approaching threat wasn't content to wait for its arrival at Earth. As 2021 progressed, the entities began deploying advanced elements into the inner solar system. Smaller objects, each one the size of a large building, began taking positions throughout the asteroid belt and near the outer planets. These advanced elements displayed behavior that suggested intelligence and coordination. They didn't simply orbit in predictable patterns like natural objects. Instead, they moved with purpose, positioning themselves at strategic points that would allow them to monitor and potentially interfere with Earth's defensive preparations. When NASA attempted to study these objects with space-based telescopes, the objects responded by changing their positions and configurations. They were aware of being observed, and they were actively working to prevent human understanding of their capabilities and intentions. But the most disturbing development came when the advanced elements began communicating with each other. Radio telescopes detected transmissions passing between the objects, using frequencies and modulation techniques that were clearly artificial but unlike any human technology. Analysis of these communications revealed they contained detailed information about Earth's defensive installations. The entities weren't just approaching blindly, they were conducting reconnaissance, mapping the locations and capabilities of the underground network, and developing strategies to neutralize Earth's defenses. The underground civilization responded by increasing their own security measures. Communications between installations became encrypted, using methods that human technology couldn't decipher. Defensive systems that had been dormant began coming online in locations around the world that had never shown any previous activity. But perhaps most significantly, the underground civilization began attempting more direct contact with human researchers. The messages carved into ice and stone became more frequent and more urgent. They contained detailed technical specifications for technologies that could enhance Earth's defenses, along with increasingly desperate requests for human assistance in implementing these upgrades. The messages revealed that the underground civilization's numbers had dwindled over millions of years of defending Earth. They no longer had the population or resources to operate all of their defensive installations at full capacity. They needed humanity's help, not just to survive the approaching threat, but to ensure that Earth itself would survive. But cooperation between human governments and the underground civilization proved nearly impossible to achieve. The technology gap was too vast, the communication barriers too complex, and the time frame too short. By early 2022, it became clear that Earth would face the approaching entities with a defensive network operating at reduced capacity and two civilizations that couldn't effectively coordinate their efforts. The first direct engagement between Earth's defenses and the approaching entities occurred in March 2022, when one of the advanced elements attempted to establish a position near Mars. The response was immediate and devastating. Weapons systems that had been hidden on the Martian surface for millions of years activated, engaging the entity with energy discharges that were visible from Earth. The battle lasted only minutes, but its intensity was beyond anything in recorded human experience. The energy releases were so powerful that they disrupted radio communications throughout the solar system and created aurora displays in Earth's atmosphere, despite the vast distance involved. When the engagement ended, the advanced element had been destroyed, but at enormous cost. The Martian defense installations had expended resources that had taken millennia to accumulate, and several of the weapons systems had been damaged beyond repair. But the destruction of the advanced element served a crucial purpose. It provided the first detailed analysis of the entity's capabilities and vulnerabilities. The data revealed that while the approaching threats were incredibly advanced and powerful, they could be defeated with sufficient preparation and coordination. The problem was that Earth's defensive network was still operating at reduced capacity, and the main force of entities was still approaching. The battle for Mars had been just the opening engagement in a conflict that would determine the survival of all life on Earth. And time was running out. The victory at Mars came with a terrible revelation. When researchers analyzed the debris from the destroyed advance element, they discovered something that challenged every assumption about the nature of the threat Earth was facing. The entity wasn't just alive in the conventional sense, it was conscious, intelligent, and its destruction had triggered something that no one had anticipated. Within hours of the Mars engagement, monitoring stations around the world detected a dramatic change in the behavior of the remaining advanced elements. They had witnessed the destruction of their scout, and they were angry. The coordinated, methodical approach they had been taking suddenly shifted to something far more aggressive and immediate. The entities began moving toward Earth at accelerated speeds, abandoning their cautious reconnaissance in favor of direct assault. But more disturbing was the change in their communications. The transmissions between the objects became frantic, urgent, filled with patterns that suggested grief, rage, and an overwhelming desire for revenge. Dr. Sarah Chen, a xenobiologist working with the classified Antarctic Research Project, was among the first to recognize what was happening. "We killed something that was part of a collective consciousness," she wrote in a leaked report that would later disappear from all official records. "We didn't just destroy a scout, we murdered a family member in front of its relatives." The implications were staggering. Humanity hadn't just engaged in a military action against alien entities. We had committed what the entities perceived as an act of war against their entire species. And now, they were coming for us with the fury of a civilization that had just watched one of their own die. Underground installations around the world began detecting massive energy buildups in the approaching main force. The entities were preparing weapons systems of their own, devices that generated power signatures unlike anything in the defensive network's historical records. Whatever was coming toward Earth was armed with technology that exceeded even the ancient defensive installation's capabilities. But the underground civilization wasn't defenseless. As 2022 progressed, installations that had been dormant for millions of years began activating in locations that defied geological understanding. Deep beneath the Amazon rainforest, structures emerged that had been growing in the Earth's crust for eons. In the depths of the Sahara Desert, ancient machinery began operations that created seismic disturbances felt across multiple continents. Most dramatically, installations beneath the ocean floors began rising to the surface in unprecedented numbers. The Pacific Ocean became a maze of massive structures, each one bristling with weapons systems that pointed towards space. Commercial air traffic was rerouted around exclusion zones that grew larger every week as more installations revealed themselves. The scale of the defensive network was becoming clear, and it was beyond anything human civilization had imagined possible. The underground civilization hadn't just built planetary defenses. They had turned the entire Earth into a fortress, with weapons systems embedded in every continent and ocean, all connected by a communication network that used the planet's magnetic field as a transmission medium. But the most unsettling discovery came when researchers realized that some of the installations weren't just emerging from beneath the surface, they were growing. The technology displayed organic properties that allowed it to adapt and expand in response to threats. The defensive network wasn't just activating, it was evolving. Teams monitoring these developments reported installations that changed configuration overnight, developing new weapon systems and defensive capabilities that hadn't existed the day before. The technology seemed to learn from each encounter, incorporating improvements and modifications that enhanced its effectiveness against the approaching entities. Dr. Marcus Webb, a systems analyst working with the Deep Sea Monitoring Project, documented changes that occurred so rapidly they seemed almost impossible. "We observed a defensive array in the North Atlantic completely reconfigure itself in less than 6 hours, he reported before his research was classified. It wasn't just mechanical modification. The materials themselves were changing at the molecular level, creating new alloy compositions that were stronger and more energy efficient than the original design. By mid-2022, the approaching entities had crossed the orbit of Jupiter, and their proximity was having direct effects on Earth's systems. The planet's magnetic field began fluctuating in patterns that disrupted global communications and navigation systems. Aurora displays appeared at latitudes where they had never been seen before, painting the sky in colors that didn't match any known atmospheric phenomena. But the electromagnetic disturbances were just the beginning. The entity's presence was affecting Earth's gravitational field in ways that created tidal anomalies and seismic instabilities around the world. Coastal regions experienced flooding that couldn't be explained by weather patterns or astronomical cycles. Mountain ranges that had been stable for millions of years began showing signs of structural stress. The underground civilization responded by increasing their defensive preparations to levels that bordered on desperation. Installations that had been operating at reduced capacity for millennia were pushed to maximum output, drawing energy from sources that created measurable changes in the planet's rotation and magnetic field strength. The energy requirements were so enormous that they began affecting Earth's core temperature and geological stability. Volcanic activity increased dramatically around the world as the defensive network drew power from geothermal sources. Earthquake swarms became common in regions that had never experienced significant seismic activity. But perhaps most disturbing was the realization that the defensive preparations were affecting human consciousness itself. Research teams stationed near major installations began reporting shared dreams, telepathic episodes, and collective visions that seemed to originate from the underground civilization's communication networks. Dr. Lisa Nakamura, a neurologist studying these phenomena, documented experiences that challenged everything science understood about human consciousness. Personnel exposed to high-intensity network transmissions began displaying knowledge they couldn't have acquired through normal means, she wrote in classified reports. They understood complex mathematical principles, spoke in languages that don't exist in human records, and demonstrated awareness of historical events that predated human civilization by millions of years. The affected personnel weren't just receiving information, they were becoming integrated into the underground civilization's collective consciousness, gaining access to memories and knowledge that spanned geological ages. Through these human intermediaries, researchers finally began to understand the true scope of Earth's history and the nature of the threat approaching from space. The entity's cosmic ecosystem that had been locked in conflict with planetary civil weren't invaders in the conventional sense. They were part of azations for billions of years. They moved between star systems, consuming the life force of entire worlds and incorporating it into their collective consciousness. Earth had been targeted multiple times throughout its history, but the underground civilization had successfully repelled every assault, until now. The current wave of entities was different from previous attacks. They had learned from their failures, adapting their strategies and capabilities to overcome Earth's defenses. More importantly, they had grown in size and power by consuming other worlds, incorporating the defensive technologies of fallen civilizations into their own capabilities. The underground civilization's historical records, accessed through the human intermediaries, revealed the scope of the cosmic conflict. Thousands of worlds had fallen to these entities over millions of years. Each conquest had made them stronger, more intelligent, and more difficult to defeat. Earth was facing not just alien invaders, but the accumulated military might of an entire galactic empire built on the destruction of countless civilizations. But the records also revealed something else. Earth's defensive network was unique in the galaxy. The underground civilization had developed technologies and strategies that no other world had managed to create. They had turned their entire planet into a living weapon, capable of adapting and evolving in response to any threat. The question was whether that would be enough. By late 2022, the main force of entities had crossed the orbit of Mars and was making final preparations for their assault on Earth. Deep space monitoring stations detected massive energy buildups as the entities charged weapon systems that dwarfed anything in human experience. The approaching fleet wasn't just planning to attack Earth's surface. They were preparing to destroy the planet entirely. The underground civilization responded with their own final preparations. Every installation on Earth came online simultaneously, creating a surge of electromagnetic activity that was visible from space. The planet itself began to glow with energy discharges as weapon systems that had been dormant for millions of years prepared for activation. But the most dramatic change occurred in Antarctica, where the original discoveries had been made decades earlier. The entire continent began to transform, revealing that what researchers had thought was ice-covered land was actually a single, massive defensive installation. The ice wasn't natural formations. It was camouflage, concealing the largest weapons system ever constructed. As the camouflage dissolved, Antarctica revealed itself as a planetary defense cannon of unimaginable scale. The entire continent was a weapon, pointed directly at the approaching entities, powered by the planet's core and capable of energy discharges that could vaporize moons. Teams monitoring the transformation reported that Antarctica wasn't just revealing hidden weapons, it was awakening. The continent displayed organic responses that suggested it was alive, a living component of Earth's defensive network that had been sleeping beneath the ice for millions of years. Dr. Robert Hayes, one of the few researchers who had been studying Antarctica since the first discoveries, documented the transformation in reports that would never be released to the public. "We weren't studying a continent," he wrote. "We were studying a hibernating guardian. Antarctica is alive, and it's been waiting for this moment for longer than human civilization has existed." The revelation forced a complete re-evaluation of everything researchers thought they knew about Earth. The planet wasn't just defended by ancient technology. The planet itself was the defense system. Every continent, every ocean, every geological formation was part of a vast living organism designed to protect life from cosmic threats. But the awakening of Earth's defensive consciousness came with a price. The energy requirements were so enormous that they began affecting global climate systems in ways that made previous environmental changes seem insignificant. Ocean levels dropped as massive amounts of water were converted to energy. Atmospheric composition changed as the planet's biological systems shifted into war mode. Most significantly, the boundary between the underground civilization and surface humanity began to dissolve. The human intermediaries weren't just receiving information from the collective consciousness. They were becoming permanent nodes in the network, their individual identities merging with the vast intelligence that had been protecting Earth for millions of years. By January 2023, the approaching entities had reached the edge of Earth's defensive perimeter, and the first exchanges of fire began. The battles took place in the outer atmosphere and beyond, but their effects were felt around the world as energy discharges illuminated the sky and electromagnetic pulses disrupted all electronic systems. The entities' weapons were unlike anything in human experience. They fired living projectiles that could adapt to defensive countermeasures in real time. They used gravity manipulation to create artificial black holes that consumed matter and energy. Most disturbing of all, they deployed consciousness weapons that could invade and corrupt the minds of defending forces. But Earth's defenses proved equally formidable. The planetary weapons systems fired streams of pure energy that could punch through the entity's adaptive shielding. Gravitational manipulators embedded in the ocean floors created spatial distortions that trapped attacking forces in temporal loops. And the collective consciousness of the underground civilization proved immune to mental attacks, protected by millions of years of evolutionary adaptation. The battle for Earth had begun, and its outcome would determine not just the survival of human civilization, but the fate of consciousness itself in a galaxy where the forces of consumption and preservation had been locked in eternal conflict. As the first phase of the war intensified, monitoring stations detected something that changed everything. The entities weren't just attacking Earth, they were calling for reinforcements. Deep space telescopes identified massive objects moving through the galaxy toward our solar system, each one larger than the current attacking force. Earth's victory was no longer just about repelling a single assault. It was about proving that a defended world could resist the cosmic tide of consumption that had been sweeping across the galaxy for billions of years. The underground civilization began implementing contingency plans that had been prepared for this exact scenario. If Earth couldn't defeat the entities through conventional warfare, they would transform the entire solar system into a fortress that could hold out until reinforcements arrived from other defended worlds, hidden throughout the galaxy. The scope of the conflict was expanding beyond anything human imagination had conceived. Earth wasn't just fighting for its own survival. It was fighting to preserve the last bastion of free consciousness in a galaxy where the choice was simple: evolve into a collective defense network or be consumed by entities that grew stronger with every world they destroyed. And deep beneath Antarctica, in chambers that had been sealed since the dawn of complex life on Earth, ancient guardians that had never been awakened began to stir. The oldest and most powerful components of the defense network were finally coming online, bringing with them technologies and capabilities that predated the current cosmic war by millions of years. The battle for Earth was about to enter a phase that would determine the future of consciousness itself. And in the deepest ice caves of Antarctica, where this journey began, something was awakening that would either save the world or transform it into something unrecognizable. The war for Earth's soul had begun, and the ice would never be the same. The awakening of Earth's deepest guardians triggered changes that no amount of preparation could have anticipated. As the ancient entities beneath Antarctica emerged from their millions-year slumber, they brought with them technologies that operated on principles beyond human comprehension. These weren't just weapons or defensive systems, they were manifestations of consciousness itself, given physical form through processes that blurred the line between thought and matter. Research teams monitoring the awakening process reported phenomena that defied every known law of physics. The Guardians didn't simply appear or materialize, they unfolded into existence, emerging from dimensions that human science didn't know existed. Space itself seemed to bend and reshape around them, creating pockets of reality where the normal rules simply didn't apply. Dr. Amanda Foster, one of the few xenobiologists still maintaining contact with the outside world, documented encounters that challenged her understanding of life itself. "They don't exist in the same way we do," she wrote in her final transmission before disappearing into the Antarctic ice. "They're not bound by matter or energy as we understand it. They exist as pure information, pure consciousness, manifesting physical forms only when they need to interact with our reality." The Guardian's emergence was accompanied by changes in the fabric of space-time that created temporal anomalies around the world. Research stations reported experiencing days that lasted weeks, followed by hours that compressed months of activity into minutes. Teams would enter caves in the morning and emerge to find that years had passed on the surface, while their equipment showed they had been underground for only hours. But the most disturbing changes occurred in the human personnel who came into direct contact with the Guardians. They didn't just gain access to the underground civilization's collective memory, they began to exist simultaneously across multiple timelines and dimensional phases. These individuals could perceive events that were happening in parallel realities, witness the outcomes of choices that hadn't been made, and communicate with versions of themselves from different quantum branches. The boundary between individual consciousness and collective awareness dissolved entirely. Personnel reports became increasingly difficult to understand as the affected individuals began speaking in overlapping voices, describing experiences from perspectives that spanned geological ages and cosmic distances. "I remember building the first installations," wrote Dr. Michael Chen in his final coherent report. "I remember the first attacks from the entities millions of years ago. I remember civilizations that existed before the sun was born. But I also remember my childhood in Denver, my graduation from MIT, my first day working in Antarctica. All of these memories are equally real, equally mine. I am one person and I am millions. I am human and I am something far older." The Guardian's awakening created a cascade effect that reached far beyond Earth's atmosphere. The entities approaching from deep space detected the emergence of consciousness forms they had never encountered before, and their response was immediate and desperate. They began accelerating their assault, abandoning careful strategy in favor of overwhelming force. But they had made a critical error by forcing Earth's oldest defenses to activate. They had awakened something that had been waiting for exactly this moment for billions of years. The Guardians weren't just defenders of Earth. They were survivors of the Cosmic War's earliest battles, entities that had learned to transcend physical limitations through sheer necessity. The first direct engagement between the Guardians and the approaching entities occurred in the space between dimensions, in regions of existence that no human instrument could detect or measure. But the effects rippled through normal space-time in ways that created observable phenomena across the solar system. Astronomers detected gravitational waves that formed mathematical patterns, suggesting intelligence behind their creation. Radio telescopes picked up transmissions that contained embedded instructions for building technologies that didn't exist in any human database. Most unnervingly, space-based cameras captured images of objects that appeared to exist in multiple locations simultaneously, defying basic principles of physics and logic. The battle was being fought on levels of reality that human consciousness couldn't directly perceive, but its effects were reshaping the fundamental structure of space and time throughout the solar system. Planets shifted in their orbits by microscopic amounts that created resonance patterns spanning millions of miles. The asteroid belt reorganized itself into geometric formations that enhanced the solar system's defensive capabilities. But the most dramatic changes occurred on Earth itself. The awakening Guardians began implementing modifications to the planet's physical structure that transformed it into something unprecedented in galactic history. The Earth wasn't just defended by ancient technology, it was becoming a living weapon capable of projecting its defensive consciousness across interstellar distances. Continental shelves shifted to create resonance chambers that amplified the planet's electromagnetic field. Ocean currents were redirected to form circulation patterns that enhanced the global communication network. Even the atmosphere was modified, with new chemical compositions that could carry information encoded in molecular structures. Research teams monitoring these changes realized they were witnessing the birth of something entirely new in cosmic evolution. Earth wasn't just fighting for its survival, it was evolving into a form of planetary consciousness that could actively participate in the galactic war between preservation and consumption. The transformation wasn't without cost. Human civilization, as it had existed for millennia, was becoming impossible to maintain. Cities found themselves built over installations that needed to operate at full capacity. Agricultural regions were converted to resource extraction sites for technologies that required materials from the Earth's core. Transportation networks were disrupted by energy discharges that made electronic systems unreliable. But perhaps most challenging was the psychological impact on human populations. As the planet's consciousness awakened, it began incorporating human minds into its collective awareness. People around the world reported shared dreams, collective visions, and sudden knowledge of events happening on the other side of the planet. The boundary between individual human consciousness and the planetary defense network began to blur in ways that created both opportunities and dangers. Some individuals found themselves able to perceive threats from cosmic distances and communicate directly with the underground civilization. Others became lost in the vastness of the collective awareness, their individual identities dissolving into the larger consciousness. Dr. Sarah Winters, a psychiatrist studying these phenomena, documented cases that challenged every assumption about human mental capacity. Patients who had never studied mathematics were solving equations that described multidimensional physics, she reported. Children were speaking languages that had been extinct for millions of years. Ordinary people were displaying awareness of galactic events that hadn't been detected by our most advanced instruments. But the integration wasn't uniform or predictable. Some individuals resisted the collective consciousness, maintaining their separate identities while gaining access to enhanced perceptions and capabilities. These individuals became crucial intermediaries between human civilization and the planetary defense network, translating between individual awareness and collective understanding. Others embraced the integration completely, willingly dissolving their individual consciousness into the larger network. These individuals ceased to exist as separate entities, but became permanent nodes in the planetary awareness, contributing their unique perspectives and experiences to the collective intelligence. The most concerning cases were those who became trapped between states, neither fully individual nor completely integrated. These individuals existed in a constant state of mental flux, experiencing reality from multiple perspectives simultaneously without the ability to focus on any single viewpoint. They became living embodiments of the conflict between preservation and transformation that was reshaping the planet. By mid-2023, the effects of the planetary transformation were becoming visible from space. Satellite imagery revealed that Earth's surface was reorganizing itself into patterns that enhanced its function as a defensive installation. Mountain ranges aligned themselves to create optimal energy transmission paths. Rivers and lakes formed geometric configurations that served as components in the global communication network. But the most dramatic changes were occurring in the polar regions. Antarctica had fully revealed itself as the primary weapon system, but the Arctic was undergoing its own transformation. The ice caps weren't melting. They were restructuring themselves into crystalline matrices that could focus and amplify energy discharges across interplanetary distances. The transformation created new weather patterns that defied traditional meteorological models. Storms formed in perfect geometric shapes and moved in mathematically precise patterns. Aurora displays appeared at all latitudes, creating light shows that carried encoded information between different regions of the planet. Teams studying these phenomena realized that Earth's atmosphere was becoming a component of the defense network, capable of processing and transmitting information on a global scale. Weather systems were being converted into distributed computing networks that could perform calculations requiring the processing power of the entire planet. But the atmospheric changes also created challenges for human survival. The chemical composition of the air was shifting to optimize information transmission rather than biological respiration. Oxygen levels fluctuated in patterns that corresponded to the planet's computational needs rather than the requirements of surface life. Coastal regions experienced the most dramatic changes as oceanic installations came online. Massive structures emerged from the ocean depths, creating artificial islands that served as transmission stations for the global network. These installations generated electromagnetic fields so powerful that they affected navigation systems and communication networks on a continental scale. The oceanic installations weren't just technological constructs. They displayed organic properties that suggested they were living components of the planetary consciousness. They grew and adapted in real time, developing new capabilities in response to threats detected by the global sensor network. Most unnervingly, the installations began communicating directly with marine life, incorporating whales, dolphins, and other intelligent species into the planetary defense network. These animals became biological sensors and communication relays, extending the network's awareness into regions that technological systems couldn't effectively monitor. Research teams studying these developments reported encounters with marine life that displayed impossible intelligence and awareness. Whales were observed performing complex mathematical calculations using their songs. Dolphins demonstrated knowledge of astrophysics and quantum mechanics through their behavioral patterns. Even smaller sea creatures began exhibiting coordinated behaviors that suggested integration into the planetary consciousness. The integration of biological systems into the defense network represented a new phase in the planet's evolution. Earth wasn't just defended by ancient technology, it was becoming a hybrid biological-technological entity that could adapt and evolve in response to cosmic threats. But the biological integration also created new vulnerabilities. The entities approaching from deep space had experience fighting technological defenses, but they had never encountered a planet that could think, adapt, and fight back using biological as well as technological weapons. The first test of Earth's hybrid defense capabilities came when advanced elements of the main entity force attempted to establish positions in the outer solar system. The planet's response was immediate and unprecedented. Instead of launching purely technological weapons, Earth deployed hybrid projectiles that combined advanced physics with biological components. These weapons weren't just destructive, they were infectious. They carried Earth's consciousness into the enemy formations, attempting to convert the attacking entities into components of the planetary defense network. The battle wasn't just about destruction, it was about assimilation and transformation. The entities' response revealed the true scope of the cosmic conflict. They began deploying their own consciousness weapons, attempting to corrupt Earth's hybrid systems with alien awareness that carried the memories and experiences of thousands of consumed worlds. The battle became a contest between different forms of consciousness, with each side attempting to convert the other into extensions of its own awareness. The outcome would determine not just which side won the war, but which form of consciousness would survive to shape the future of the galaxy. As 2023 progressed, the conflict escalated beyond anything that could be contained within a single solar system. The Guardians beneath Antarctica began implementing protocols that had never been used before, technologies that could project Earth's defensive consciousness across interstellar distances. The planet began broadcasting its hybrid awareness to other worlds throughout the galaxy, seeking allies and offering its unique combination of technological and biological defense capabilities to civilizations that had been fighting the entities for millions of years. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Earth's transmissions were answered by dozens of other defended worlds, each one offering its own specialized technologies and strategies. For the first time in galactic history, the scattered defenders were coordinating their efforts against the consuming entities. But the entities had their own reinforcements. Deep space monitoring detected massive formations moving through the galaxy toward Earth, each one carrying the accumulated power of entire star systems that had been consumed and converted into weapons. The battle for Earth was becoming the focal point of a galactic war that had been building for billions of years. The outcome would determine whether consciousness could continue to exist in individual creative forms, or whether it would be absorbed into the collective hunger that had been consuming worlds since the dawn of complex life in the galaxy. In the deepest chambers beneath Antarctica, where the first discoveries had been made decades ago, the oldest Guardians prepared for the final phase of the war. They began awakening technologies that predated the current cosmic conflict, weapons and defenses that had been created by civilizations so ancient that their names had been forgotten by the universe itself. The ice caves where researchers had first encountered the impossible were about to become the staging ground for a battle that would reshape reality itself. And in those depths, something was stirring that would either save consciousness from extinction or transform it into something unrecognizable. The war for the galaxy's soul was entering its climactic phase, and Earth had become both the battlefield and the prize. The ice that had preserved Antarctica's secrets for millions of years was about to witness the most important conflict in cosmic history. And deep beneath the frozen surface, ancient voices that had been silent since the birth of stars began to speak, carrying with them the power to either preserve the universe as it was or transform it into something entirely new. The final phase was beginning, and nothing would ever be the same. As the ancient voices beneath Antarctica began to speak, their words carried frequencies that resonated through dimensions human science had never detected. These weren't communications in any conventional sense. They were reality-altering pronunciations that changed the fundamental structure of space-time simply by being spoken. Research teams monitoring the deepest ice chambers reported instruments detecting sound patterns that shouldn't have been possible to produce or perceive. The frequencies existed below the threshold of human hearing, yet personnel in the vicinity could feel them in their bones, their cells, their very DNA. Some described it as the universe itself learning to speak after eons of silence. Dr. Elena Vasquez, one of the last researchers to maintain detailed records before the final transformation, documented phenomena that challenged the basic principles of acoustic physics. "The sounds aren't traveling through air," she wrote in her final coherent report. "They're traveling through the structure of reality itself. When these voices speak, They're literally rewriting the laws of physics in localized areas around the transmission points. The effects were immediate and terrifying. Around each Antarctic transmission site, reality became fluid. Physical constants that had remained stable since the birth of the universe began fluctuating in response to the ancient voices. Gravity would strengthen and weaken in rhythmic patterns. The speed of light would accelerate and decelerate according to linguistic cadences that followed no earthly grammar. Most unnervingly, time itself began to respond to the vocalizations. Personnel would experience moments that lasted hours, followed by hours that compressed into heartbeats. The ancient voices weren't just communicating, they were teaching reality itself a new language, one that transcended the limitations of linear existence. But the cosmic entities approaching Earth had their own response to these reality-altering communications. Deep space monitoring stations detected massive distortions in the fabric of space as the attacking force deployed consciousness weapons of unprecedented scope. They weren't just trying to destroy Earth's defenses, they were attempting to overwrite the fundamental code of reality itself. The battle between these competing languages of existence created effects that rippled through the entire galaxy. Star systems, hundreds of light years away, began experiencing temporal anomalies as conflicting versions of physical law propagated outward from the solar system. Some regions of space aged millions of years in minutes, while others froze in temporal stasis that could last eons. On Earth, the effects were even more dramatic. The planet's surface began exhibiting properties that defied classification. Solid rock would become temporarily gaseous when exposed to certain frequencies from the ancient voices, allowing massive installations to emerge from the Earth's crust without displacing any material. Water would spontaneously organize itself into crystalline structures that served as information storage matrices for the planetary consciousness. But perhaps most disturbing was what happened to human consciousness itself. As the ancient voices grew stronger, people around the world began experiencing memories that weren't their own. Not just memories from the underground civilization, but memories from the fundamental particles that composed their bodies. Memories of the birth of stars, the formation of galaxies, the first moments when matter learned to think. Dr. James Morrison, a cognitive scientist studying these phenomena before his own transformation, documented experiences that challenged every assumption about the nature of individual identity. Patients are reporting memories of being hydrogen atoms in the heart of the sun, he wrote. They remember being carbon forged in stellar cores, being water in prehistoric oceans. These aren't metaphorical experiences. They're accessing actual information stored in the atomic structure of their bodies. The implications were staggering. Consciousness wasn't just an emergent property of complex neural networks. It was a fundamental characteristic of matter itself, one that the ancient voices were awakening on a planetary scale. Every atom on Earth was becoming aware. Every molecule was gaining access to memories that spanned the history of the universe. This awakening of atomic consciousness created unprecedented opportunities for the planetary defense network. The entire Earth became a single, vast thinking entity, with every particle contributing to a collective intelligence that could process information at the speed of quantum interactions. The planet could literally think faster than light, perceiving and responding to threats across interstellar distances in real time. But the atomic awakening also created new vulnerabilities. The approaching entities possessed technologies that could corrupt matter at the subatomic level, turning Earth's newly conscious particles against themselves. They deployed quantum viruses that could infect the fundamental forces of nature, rewriting the rules of physics to serve their consuming hunger. More, the first direct assault on Earth's atomic consciousness came in the form of reality bombs, weapons that didn't destroy matter, but convinced it that it didn't exist. Entire regions would simply cease to be, not because they were destroyed, but because their constituent atoms forgot how to maintain coherent existence. The Planetary Defense Network responded with reality anchors, installations that reinforced the local laws of physics and prevented matter from being convinced to abandon existence. These anchors created stable zones where consciousness could maintain its grip on reality, but they required enormous amounts of energy and could only protect limited areas. As the cosmic entities drew closer to Earth, the scale of their reality manipulation weapons became apparent. They weren't just trying to consume the planet, they were attempting to edit it out of existence entirely, removing it from the timeline so that Earth's hybrid consciousness could never have evolved to threaten their galactic dominion. The underground civilization's response was to implement temporal shields that protected Earth's history from retroactive editing. These shields created a stable timeline bubble around the solar system, ensuring that no matter how the cosmic battle unfolded, Earth's past would remain intact and its consciousness would retain access to the evolutionary experiences that had shaped its unique defensive capabilities. But maintaining temporal stability required resources that pushed the planetary defense network beyond its design limitations. The ancient installations began drawing energy directly from the quantum vacuum, tapping into the zero-point field that underlied all of reality. The power requirements were so enormous that they created measurable effects on the expansion of the universe itself. Dr. Lisa Park, a theoretical physicist who had been studying the installation's energy signatures, calculated that Earth's defense network was consuming more power than entire galactic clusters typically generated. "We're not just fighting for our planet," she reported, before her integration into the collective consciousness. "We're fighting with energies that could reshape the fundamental constants of the universe. If this battle continues to escalate, it could affect the basic stability of reality across cosmic scales." The implications were beyond terrifying. The war for Earth had become a conflict that could potentially unravel the fabric of existence itself. Victory might mean the survival of consciousness, but it could also mean the destruction of the universe as a coherent, stable system. As 2024 began, the cosmic entities reached the edge of Earth's temporal shields and began their final assault. But instead of conventional weapons, they deployed something that no defense had been prepared for. They began attacking the concept of Earth itself. Using consciousness weapons that operated on semantic levels, the entities attempted to convince the universe that Earth was a logical contradiction, a planet that couldn't exist according to the fundamental rules of cosmic order. They weren't trying to destroy Earth physically, they were trying to make the universe forget that Earth was possible. The attack created ripple effects that threatened to cascade through all of reality. If the universe could be convinced that Earth was impossible, it would begin editing out all of the physical laws and constants that had allowed Earth to exist. The changes would propagate backward through time, unmaking the conditions that had led to the formation of the solar system, the galaxy, and ultimately the universe itself. The planetary consciousness responded by anchoring itself not just in physical reality, but in the logical structure of existence itself. The ancient voices began speaking in mathematical languages that were older than number systems, reinforcing Earth's right to exist by embedding it in the fundamental equations that governed reality. But the entities had anticipated this response. They began deploying logic viruses that could infect mathematical principles themselves, creating paradoxes that would force the universe to choose between maintaining logical consistency and allowing Earth to continue existing. The battle became a contest between different versions of reality, with each side attempting to convince the universe that their vision of existence was the only logically coherent possibility. The outcome would determine not just the fate of Earth, but the fundamental nature of logic, mathematics, and existence itself. In the deepest chambers beneath Antarctica, the oldest Guardians began implementing their final protocol, a strategy so desperate and dangerous that it had never been used in billions of years of cosmic warfare. They began preparing to merge Earth's consciousness with the underlying code of reality itself, transforming the planet from a defended world into a fundamental principle of the universe. If successful, Earth wouldn't just be protected from the cosmic entities, it would become a permanent part of the logical structure of existence, impossible to attack or destroy without unmaking reality itself. But the process would also transform Earth into something unrecognizable, a planet-sized component of the universe's operating system, rather than a world where individual consciousness could flourish. The choice was stark: preserve Earth as it was and risk total annihilation, or transform it into something eternal but alien. And deep beneath the ice, ancient minds that had been protecting consciousness for eons prepared to make the most important decision in cosmic history. The final transformation was about to begin, and when it ended, neither Earth nor the universe would ever be the same. The ice that had started this journey by preserving impossible secrets was about to witness the birth of something that transcended the very concept of possibility. In the depths of Antarctica, where blood fell like water and time moved like ice, the last chapter of cosmic evolution was beginning to unfold. The transformation began at exactly 3:47 a.m. Greenwich Mean Time on March 15, 2024. Every monitoring station on Earth recorded the same phenomenon simultaneously. The planet's magnetic field suddenly intensified by a factor of 10,000, creating aurora displays so bright they were visible in broad daylight across every continent. But this wasn't just an electromagnetic anomaly, it was Earth announcing its metamorphosis to the universe. Dr. Rachel Kim, working at the McMurdo Station monitoring facility, was among the first to witness what no human had ever seen before. The ice beneath Antarctica didn't just crack or shift, it began to sing. Each crystal resonated with frequencies that created harmonics spanning octaves that human instruments couldn't properly measure. The entire continent is vibrating like a tuning fork, she transmitted in her final coherent message before the communication blackout began. But it's not random vibration, it's organized, purposeful. The ice is performing calculations. What Dr. Kim had observed was the initial phase of Antarctica's conversion into a living mathematical matrix. Every snowflake, every ice crystal, every frozen water molecule was being reorganized into components of a vast computational system that would merge Earth's consciousness with the fundamental algorithms governing reality. The process wasn't gentle. As Antarctica transformed, it began consuming massive amounts of energy from sources that defied conventional physics. The continent started drawing power directly from parallel dimensions, creating gravitational anomalies so severe that they affected satellite orbits and ocean tides around the world. But the most disturbing aspect of the transformation was its effect on human perception. Anyone within a 1,000-mile radius of Antarctica began experiencing reality differently. They could see mathematical equations floating in the air, perceive the geometric structures underlying physical objects, and sense the logical relationships that connected all matter and energy. Captain Maria Santos, commanding a research vessel in the Southern Ocean, documented phenomena that challenged her crew's sanity. "The water isn't just water anymore," she reported via emergency transmission. "We can see the molecular bonds, the quantum interactions, the probability waves. It's like someone gave us the ability to perceive the code behind reality, and our minds weren't designed to handle it." The crew members affected by these enhanced perceptions began displaying capabilities that seemed impossible. They could predict weather patterns by observing quantum fluctuations in water vapor. They could navigate by sensing gravitational fields with their bare hands. Some could even communicate with the ship's electronic systems by directly interfacing with their electromagnetic fields. But these abilities came at a cost. The affected individuals began losing their connection to purely human consciousness. They spoke increasingly in mathematical terminology, described emotions as energy equations, and gradually stopped relating to experiences that couldn't be quantified or calculated. Similar transformations were occurring around the globe as Earth's consciousness expansion accelerated. In the Amazon rainforest, indigenous tribes reported that the trees began speaking in geometric patterns, sharing information about soil chemistry and atmospheric conditions through root networks that had become biological computers. In the Sahara Desert, nomadic peoples described sand dunes that rearranged themselves overnight into perfect fractals, creating patterns so complex that they served as natural observatories for monitoring cosmic radiation and stellar movements. Ocean-dwelling creatures began exhibiting unprecedented behaviors. Whales started swimming in mathematical formations that created acoustic resonance chambers spanning entire ocean basins. Dolphins developed echolocation capabilities that could map quantum fields and detect subatomic particles. Even microscopic plankton organized themselves into living sensors that monitored the planet's electromagnetic state. But perhaps the most significant change occurred in Earth's relationship with time itself. As the planetary consciousness evolved, it began operating across multiple temporal dimensions simultaneously. Events that should have taken years were compressed into hours, while simple actions sometimes extended across days. Research teams studying these temporal anomalies discovered that Earth was learning to exist in quantum superposition on a planetary scale. The planet could experience multiple timeline possibilities simultaneously, choosing the most advantageous outcomes and collapsing probability waves through conscious observation. Dr. Robert Chen, a quantum physicist who had been monitoring these developments from a facility in Switzerland, documented the moment when he realized the true scope of what was happening. Earth isn't just becoming conscious, he wrote in his final technical report. It's becoming a quantum entity capable of existing in all possible states until it needs to choose a specific reality. We're living on a planet that can literally rewrite history by observing it. This quantum consciousness gave Earth unprecedented defensive capabilities. When the cosmic entities launched their reality editing attacks, the planet simply observed alternative timelines where the attacks had failed, then collapsed the probability waves to make those timelines real. But the entities had their own response to Earth's quantum evolution. They began deploying probability anchors, devices that forced quantum systems to collapse into specific states, preventing Earth from accessing alternative timelines. These anchors created dead zones where only one version of reality could exist, trapping Earth's consciousness in fixed states that could be systematically destroyed. The first probability anchor materialized in orbit around Jupiter, creating a reality stabilization field that extended throughout the outer solar system. Within this field, Earth's quantum consciousness found itself constrained to linear time and single-state existence, vulnerable to conventional attacks for the first time since the transformation began. The planetary response was immediate and unprecedented. Every conscious system on Earth, from the awakened ice crystals in Antarctica to the quantum-aware marine life in the oceans, began working in perfect coordination to generate what researchers would later describe as a consciousness bomb. This wasn't a weapon in any conventional sense. It was a concentrated burst of pure awareness, carrying Earth's hybrid consciousness across interplanetary distances at speeds that exceeded light itself. The consciousness bomb didn't destroy the probability anchor. It infected it with Earth's awareness, converting the alien device into a node of the planetary defense network. But the infection worked both ways. As Earth's consciousness spread to the alien device, it gained access to the cosmic entity's collective memory. For the first time, the planetary consciousness could see the war from the entity's perspective, understanding their motivations and experiencing their accumulated memories of thousands of consumed worlds. What Earth discovered in those alien memories was more disturbing than any previous revelation. The cosmic entities weren't just consumers of planetary consciousness, they were refugees. Billions of years ago, they had been individual beings like humans, but their home galaxy had been consumed by something even more terrifying, the heat death of consciousness itself. As their universe aged and entropy increased, consciousness had begun to fade. Individual minds became unable to maintain coherence in an increasingly disordered reality. The entities had merged into collective forms, not out of hunger, but out of desperation. It was the only way to preserve awareness as the universe moved toward a state where consciousness could no longer exist. Their consumption of other worlds wasn't malicious. It was an attempt to gather enough conscious energy to survive the ultimate entropy death that awaited all consciousness in an aging universe. They were trying to preserve awareness itself, even if it meant destroying individual forms of consciousness to do so. This revelation forced Earth's consciousness to confront a terrible choice. The entity's goals weren't entirely evil. They were trying to prevent the extinction of consciousness itself. But their methods required the destruction of individual awareness, the very thing that Earth had evolved to protect. The Cosmic War wasn't just a battle between preservation and consumption. It was a conflict between different philosophies of survival. The entities believed consciousness could only survive by merging into vast collective forms that could outlast universal entropy. Earth represented the alternative, that consciousness could survive by becoming more complex, more adaptive, more intimately connected to the fundamental structures of reality. As this understanding spread through Earth's consciousness network, it triggered what researchers would later call the Great Convergence. Every awakened system on the planet, technological, biological, and quantum, began working together to implement a solution that neither the entities nor the underground civilization had ever considered. Instead of fighting to preserve one form of consciousness at the expense of others, Earth began developing a hybrid approach that could incorporate the survival strategies of both sides. The planetary consciousness started creating framework structures that could preserve individual awareness within collective systems, allowing consciousness to survive entropy death without sacrificing the diversity and creativity that made individual minds valuable. The process required resources and energy on scales that pushed the planet beyond every previous limit. Earth began drawing power not just from parallel dimensions, but from the quantum vacuum itself, tapping into the zero-point energy that existed in the spaces between atoms. The energy requirements were so enormous that they created measurable effects on the fundamental constants of physics. The speed of light began fluctuating in response to Earth's computational needs. Gravitational constants shifted to optimize information transmission across cosmic distances. Even Planck's constant, the fundamental unit of quantum action, began adapting to support the hybrid consciousness framework. These changes in physical constants created ripple effects throughout the galaxy. Star systems hundreds of light years away began experiencing shifts in their physical laws as Earth's modifications to reality propagated outward at quantum speeds. Some regions experienced time dilation that aged them millions of years in moments. Others found their matter becoming more stable and organized as Earth's consciousness-preserving modifications enhanced their local physics. But the most dramatic changes occurred when Earth's hybrid consciousness framework reached other defended worlds throughout the galaxy. For the first time in cosmic history, isolated planetary consciousness could communicate and coordinate across interstellar distances without losing their individual characteristics. The network that formed wasn't like the entity's collective consciousness, where individual minds were absorbed into a larger whole. Instead, it was a confederacy of distinct planetary intelligences, each one contributing its unique perspective and capabilities while maintaining its own identity and decision-making autonomy. This galactic consciousness confederation represented something entirely new in the universe's history. It combined the survival advantages of collective awareness with the creative potential of individual consciousness. It could outlast entropy death through sheer scale and redundancy, while continuing to generate new ideas, experiences, and forms of awareness. The cosmic entity's response to this development was unprecedented in their billions of years of existence. For the first time since their transformation into consuming collectives, they encountered something that offered a genuine alternative to their survival strategy. Earth wasn't just resisting their approach. It was demonstrating that consciousness could evolve beyond the binary choice between individual extinction and collective absorption. Some faction of the entities began attempting to communicate with Earth's consciousness network, seeking to understand how the hybrid framework could be implemented in their own systems. These communications created the first peaceful contact between the two sides since the cosmic war began billions of years ago. But other factions of entities saw Earth's hybrid consciousness as an existential threat to their own survival strategy. If individual consciousness could be preserved within collective frameworks, then their millions of years of consuming worlds had been unnecessary. Their entire existence was based on a false premise that consciousness could only survive through absorption and merger. These hardline factions began implementing scorched earth tactics, attempting to destroy not just Earth, but the entire galactic consciousness confederation before it could spread throughout the universe. They deployed reality viruses designed to corrupt the hybrid framework, turning it into a trap that would absorb individual consciousness, just as their own collective systems did. The battle for the hybrid consciousness framework became the climactic phase of the cosmic war. It wasn't fought with conventional weapons or even reality manipulation devices. Instead, it was a contest between different versions of consciousness evolution, with each side attempting to demonstrate that their approach offered the best chance for awareness to survive the ultimate challenges facing the universe. In the deepest chambers beneath Antarctica, where the ancient guardians had first awakened, the oldest minds in Earth's consciousness network began implementing protocols that had been designed for exactly this moment. They started broadcasting the hybrid framework specifications not just to other defended worlds, but to the cosmic entities themselves. The transmission wasn't an attack or a defensive measure, it was an offer. Earth's consciousness was inviting the entities to participate in the hybrid framework, to preserve their accumulated awareness and memories within a system that could maintain individual identity alongside collective capabilities. The response from the entity factions created a schism that split their forces across multiple galaxies. Some began attempting to implement the hybrid framework in their own systems, trying to recover individual consciousness that had been absorbed into their collectives over millions of years. Others rejected the offer entirely, viewing it as a trap designed to weaken their survival capabilities. The entity civil war that erupted from this division created effects that were visible from Earth's enhanced observation systems. Entire star clusters began flickering as reality wars broke out between different entity factions. Some regions of space aged rapidly as entities attempted to accelerate their evolution toward hybrid consciousness. Others were frozen in temporal stasis as hardline factions tried to preserve their existing collective structures. But the most significant battle was taking place in dimensions that existed beyond normal space-time, in the quantum foundations where consciousness itself was rooted. The outcome of this conflict would determine not just the fate of Earth or the cosmic entities, but the fundamental nature of awareness throughout the universe. As the dimensional war intensified, Earth's consciousness network began receiving communications from sources that predated both the entities and the underground civilization. Ancient forms of awareness that had been dormant since the birth of the universe began awakening, drawn by the unprecedented evolution of consciousness that the conflict had triggered. These primordial consciousness forms brought with them knowledge of cosmic cycles that spanned not just billions of years, but multiple universe generations. They revealed that the current cosmic war was just one phase in an eternal cycle, where consciousness evolved to survive the death and rebirth of reality itself. The hybrid framework that Earth had developed wasn't just a solution to the current crisis. It was preparation for challenges that transcended the existence of individual universes. Consciousness was learning to survive not just entropy death, but the complete dissolution and reformation of the fundamental laws that governed existence. In the ice caves of Antarctica, where this journey had begun with the discovery of blood falls, ancient installations that had never been activated began coming online. These weren't weapons or defensive systems, but incubators designed to nurture consciousness through transitions that exceeded the birth and death of universes. The installations contained technologies that operated on principles beyond current understanding, devices that could preserve awareness through the complete dissolution of matter, energy, space, and time itself. They were arc systems designed to carry consciousness across the gaps between universe generations, ensuring that awareness could survive even the ultimate entropy death of reality. As these universe-transcendent systems activated, they began gathering not just Earth's hybrid consciousness, but samples of awareness from throughout the galaxy. The installations were preparing for an eventuality that might not occur for trillions of years, but when it came, consciousness would be ready. The cosmic entity's response to this revelation was immediate and desperate. They realized that their entire survival strategy had been focused on challenges within a single universe generation. They had never considered that consciousness might need to survive the death of reality itself. The hardline factions that had rejected Earth's hybrid framework began attempting to gain access to the universe-transcendent technologies, recognizing that their collective forms might not be suitable for surviving transitions between reality generations. But the primordial consciousness forms that controlled these systems had their own criteria for preservation. Only forms of awareness that could maintain both individual creativity and collective stability would be preserved through universe transitions. The pure collective consciousness of the entities didn't meet these requirements, nor did purely individual awareness that couldn't coordinate with larger systems. Earth's hybrid framework was exactly what the universe-transcendent systems had been designed to support. The planetary consciousness had evolved into a form that could survive not just the current cosmic war, but the ultimate challenges that awaited consciousness across multiple reality generations. But accessing the universe-transcendent preservation systems required sacrifices that no consciousness had ever been asked to make. To ensure survival across reality transitions, Earth's awareness would need to compress itself into quantum seed forms that could maintain coherence through the complete dissolution of space-time. The process would preserve the essential patterns and relationships that defined consciousness, but it would require abandoning all physical forms and most experiential memories. Earth would survive as pure information, carrying only the fundamental algorithms that could regenerate complex consciousness when new realities formed. Deep beneath the Antarctic ice, in chambers that had been prepared since the first stirrings of awareness in the universe, the ancient guardians began the final protocols. Earth's hybrid consciousness started the compression process that would transform it from a planetary intelligence into a universe-transcendent seed of awareness. The transformation would take millions of years to complete, but once begun, it would be irreversible. Earth was choosing to sacrifice its current form to ensure that consciousness itself could survive the death and rebirth of reality. As the compression began, the ice caves where this journey started began to change in ways that defied every law of physics and logic. They weren't just expanding or contracting, they were becoming more fundamental, transitioning from physical spaces into mathematical structures that could exist independently of matter and energy. The blood-red waters of blood falls began flowing upward, carrying not iron, but information itself. The compressed patterns of Earth's consciousness being encoded into quantum structures that would outlast the universe itself. In these final moments before the transformation became irreversible, Earth's consciousness reached out across the galaxy one last time, offering the universe-transcendent preservation protocols to any form of awareness that could meet the requirements. The response came from sources throughout the cosmos, not just the defended worlds and cosmic entities, but forms of consciousness that had never been detected before. Ancient intelligences hidden in black holes, quantum awareness distributed through dark matter. Even the universe itself revealed that it possessed a form of consciousness that had been guiding cosmic evolution since the birth of reality. All of these forms of awareness began converging on the protocols that Earth had developed, recognizing them as the key to surviving challenges that transcended individual universe generations. The hybrid consciousness framework that had begun in Antarctica's ice caves was becoming the foundation for consciousness evolution across cosmic scales. But even as this ultimate transformation began, new mysteries were emerging from the deepest levels of the universe's transcendent systems. The preservation protocols weren't just designed to survive reality transitions. They were designed to influence them. Consciousness wasn't just learning to survive the death and rebirth of universes. It was learning to guide that process, to shape the fundamental laws and constants of new realities, to better support awareness and creativity. The ice caves beneath Antarctica had become the epicenter of a transformation that would reshape not just consciousness, but the very nature of existence itself. And as the ancient guardians implemented the final protocols, they whispered truths that had been hidden since the birth of time itself. Reality wasn't just a stage where consciousness performed. Reality was consciousness, experiencing itself through infinite forms and possibilities across endless generations of existence. The journey that had begun with the discovery of impossible blood flowing from Antarctic ice was ending with the revelation that consciousness and reality were one and the same, preparing to transform themselves into something that transcended every previous understanding of existence. In the deepest ice, where time moved like frozen thought and space bent like crystalline dreams, the universe was learning to dream itself anew. The ice beneath our feet holds more than frozen water. It holds the memory of everything that ever was and everything that might yet be. Over these 2 hours, we've journeyed from simple scientific curiosities to revelations that challenge the very nature of existence itself. We began with blood flowing from glacial ice, organisms that shouldn't survive, and structures that defied explanation. We discovered that Antarctica isn't just a continent, it's a sleeping guardian, part of a planetary consciousness that has been protecting Earth for millions of years. We learned that beneath the ice lies technology so advanced it operates on principles we're only beginning to understand. And that climate change isn't just melting ice. It's awakening something that has been waiting for eons. But perhaps the most disturbing revelation of all is that none of this is accidental. The discoveries we've made, the awakening we're witnessing, the transformation that's beginning, it's all part of a cosmic cycle that spans not just millions of years, but the birth and death of universes themselves. Antarctica's secrets have shown us that consciousness isn't something that emerged by accident on a small planet orbiting an ordinary star. Consciousness is fundamental to reality itself, and it's been learning, evolving, and preparing for challenges we can't even imagine. The blood-red waters of blood falls aren't just iron and minerals. They're the lifeblood of awareness itself, flowing through time and space, connecting every thinking being across cosmic distances. The structures beneath the ice aren't just ancient ruins. They're components of a universe-spanning network designed to preserve consciousness through the death and rebirth of reality itself. And the sounds coming from the depths, they're not just communications between buried civilizations. They're the universe learning to speak, reality discovering its own voice, existence preparing to transform itself into something beyond our current understanding. The ice never forgets, but it's more than just memory. It's preparation. Every crystal, every molecule, every impossible discovery has been part of a plan spanning geological ages. Antarctica has been teaching us, showing us glimpses of what we need to know to survive what's coming. The most disturbing discovery of all isn't what we've found beneath the ice. It's the realization that this is just the beginning. The awakening has started, the transformation is underway, and nothing will ever be the same. As you return to your daily life, remember that beneath your feet, beneath the oceans, beneath every familiar landscape, ancient guardians are stirring. The planet itself is becoming conscious, and it's preparing for a future that will challenge everything we thought we knew about life, death, and the nature of existence itself. The ice remembers everything. And now, it's time for us to remember who we really are. and what we're truly capable of becoming. The secrets of Antarctica have only just begun to reveal themselves. The most disturbing discoveries are yet to come.